Hey Sam,
Hey, what's happening?
not too much. I'm excited for the first episode of Generation Gap. Why don't
Me
you,
too. This is cool.
yeah, why don't you introduce yourself? I'll introduce myself, and then we'll go from there.
Sam. I am on Generation Gap, and I've been an avid music fan for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, my name's Paul. I'm been into music since I was probably about maybe 7 years old. It's kind of what gets me out of bed every day, and I'm really excited to finally find some type of creative outlet um, for the passion that I have for music. We're calling our podcast Generation Gap for a reason. Sam, how old are you?
I am 19, about to turn 20. I'll probably
Right.
be 20 when you hear this.
Okay. So the reason we're calling it Generation Gap is because I'm 41. So there is a large age disparity between Sam and myself. However, through our friendship and our love of music, we've realized that this could be a really good, it provides us kind of a very interesting perspective. Um, some of the music that we're going to be discussing on this podcast, I think we're going to look at it in a very different way since you and I come from, well, we're from different generations, and I think we look at music and listen to music very differently, and I think that's cool.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping to bring, newer stuff into this. And there's obviously stuff that you have a different perspective on because, say, you remember when it was released, whereas this is something that I discovered, 10 years after it came out.
Right, right,
So that's what I'm really looking forward to hearing is like what does like the OG fan of some of these albums,
of
how do they
course.
feel about them?
Right, right. And the flip side of that coin is one of the reasons why Sam and I we love talking about music. We talk about music constantly. And one of the things that I find to be so cool is that, like Sam just mentioned, he was born after a lot of this music came out, but he loves it. And there aren't too many people who are 19 going on 20 who can comfortably talk about a Dylan album or a some of U2's first albums or whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. And it's just like you don't find that with most people who are your age. So that's kind of what's led us here to making this podcast.
This is going to be very interesting, and I'm looking forward to this.
Me too, definitely.
So,
Well, we've been talking a lot about the format for our podcast, and I think we kind of hammered down an idea, a loose idea for the format that we'd like this podcast to take. Every episode is going to focus on two albums, um, and I'm going to pick an album, and Sam's going to pick an album. They might be similar, they might be completely um, different, nothing in common whatsoever. Um, and basically just sort of talk about the reason why we picked that album. And I will also go a step further. Not every album that we pick will necessarily be an album that we love.
hmm,
There could be some albums that we pick that we either A, don't care for, but feel the need to talk about, or we were just talking a couple weeks ago about the fact that uh, and this will flow seamlessly into what we're going to be talking about this week. We plan on revisiting a lot of music that maybe we didn't like 10 years ago and now really like, or vice versa. Loved when we were kids and can't stand now. So it's going to be a little bit of a different format every week, but definitely two albums. And then we have a couple other things planned for the end of the podcast.
absolutely. Speaking of which, should we get into this, starting with albums that you may have not liked and then liked?
Sure, let's do it.
So, Paul chose Ryan Adams' debut record,
Yes,
Heartbreaker.
I went with Heartbreaker by Ryan Adams, which was released just a little bit over 20 years ago, released in 2000. Um,
Yeah.
so, should I start or do you want to start? This is an album that I've loved forever, and I know that you just sort of got into it, sort of like rediscovered it recently.
Yeah, so you sent it to me a while ago. I think it was at the beginning of the summer, and I listened
Okay.
to it and I wasn't that into it. And then I revisited it because it was the album that you wanted to talk about in the podcast. And I don't know what it was. Maybe I was just in the right headspace or something, but it just completely clicked for me today.
Interesting. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm curious to hear a perspective from someone who kind of rediscovered it.
It's such an interesting alternative rock album because it's got elements of country, but it doesn't sound country. And that was my hesitancy at first, is it was just a little too country. But then the more I thought about it, it made sense. Like that's the vehicle that Ryan Adams needed to get
Mm-hmm.
his points across because it's a very lyrical heavy album. You know that's really what the focus is and what he's saying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, musically speaking, it's a pretty basic album.
Yeah,
There isn't a lot happening musically on Heartbreaker. Um, I think it's a really it's an album about lyrics. I think, uh,
absolutely.
yeah, for sure.
What I love the beginning part too, where he's arguing about more
Yeah.
about Morrissey in the studio.
Arguing about Morrissey is fantastic. It's
Yeah,
fantastic. Yeah.
and then it goes into "To Be Young is to Be Sad is to Be High," which is I can see why that's the big single from this album.
Yep.
But the one track that really stood out to me, there's a lot I liked here, was the very last track, "Sweet Little Gal."
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Simply because, like, there's piano on the record, but it's in the background, and all of a sudden, when that's the lead instrument, it just
Yeah.
completely,
Yeah.
um, catches you by off guard, catches you by
Off guard.
surprise.
Absolutely. In fact, that track is, I feel that that track, the last track of the album, is it's completely incongruous with the rest of the music on the album. It
Yeah.
doesn't really fit the album at all, that track, but it works. It totally works because it's a beautiful song.
It's one of those things where it sounds like nothing else on the record,
Nothing
but at
else
the
on the
same
record.
time, if he had ended it with another acoustic track, it would not have been as strong as an album.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, for me, I've been a Ryan Adams fan for a long time. I don't think I was really into Ryan Adams when this album came out. I'm trying to remember when I first started listening to Ryan Adams. Probably shortly after this. I probably became a big fan of his when he released Gold, which was, I think, only a couple years after Heartbreaker. It was like his follow up album, and it has a completely different vibe than Heartbreaker. I feel like with this album, especially as a debut album, from someone who was completely unknown. And I think he was really young when he recorded this, 26 or 27, something like that.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Um, I think to be able to sort of follow the mold that he followed of like, so it's obvious that he had a collection of really well written songs, especially some really, really deep, meaningful lyrics.
Yeah.
And it's cool that he had what's the word I'm looking for? The guts or the ambition to say, you know what, this album is kind of basic. It's certainly not going to appeal to everyone, but I'm putting it out. It's got to be put out the way it is because the the emotion is so clear in the album. Every song on the album has something very very raw. It's a pretty raw album. In fact, the songs are very raw.
It
Uh,
feels like to me when I heard it,
mhm.
it's definitely a breakup album. If the title is very indicative of it.
Absolutely.
But there's two different kinds of breakup albums, and then there's obviously subdivisions. But
Sure.
basically, there's either the people that are looking back on a relationship,
Hmm.
or it's immediately right after. And I feel like that's what was so great about this album is he captured the immediate sting of separating from somebody
Hmm.
and how that can be almost debilitating, in certain circumstances.
I think you're right, and I also think that if you listen to some of the tracks off the album, the sting and the pain of love lost or whatever you want to call it is still incredibly uh, it's visceral. I mean, it's obvious that some of the lyrics and some of the songs come from a place of um, of despair, of
Yeah.
heartbreak. And again, I think the title is completely indicative of the music on the album. Um, it for me, a lot of times I break. Sam and I have talked about this before. There's albums that I will just listen to if they come on in the car. Sure, fine. If if it comes on, on like a playlist, I just leave it. And it's kind of the music that you almost want to call like background music. And no matter the mood I'm in, no matter what I'm doing, I can kind of just jam along to it. This
Yeah.
album, like Heartbreaker, is not one of those albums. This is the
No.
kind of album that, for me, I can't be doing anything else when I listen to it. I have to be sitting somewhere quiet. It's the kind of music that you don't really listen to this music with somebody else. Um, and you have to kind of give yourself that permission and put yourself in that headspace where you are completely okay with listening to something that's really sad, that really
Yeah.
hurt.
It's weird how music can do that, how you may not be going through a breakup, but you can listen to an album like Heartbreaker or
Yeah,
other, famous breakup albums. Like, for me, Beck's Sea Change does it for me too,
yeah,
that even though you're not going through a breakup, you can still have the feeling of some kind of broken heart while you're in the headspace of that
yeah,
album and listening to it.
yep, yep, absolutely. Um, it's the kind of music that, and I also think too, like, it's hard to classify Heartbreaker into a genre. I'm not really sure how to classify it into a genre. I would consider it more of a singer songwriter writer album, for me. There's elements of country, there's elements of blues, and I do think that sort of the southern. Ryan Adams is from North Carolina, so I feel like that southern influence it's palpable. I don't think it's a southern
Yeah.
album, so to speak, but it's there.
So I Googled it and
Yeah,
it said that it's labeled, they have to label it for stores, that
sure.
it's labeled as alternative country, which I could kind of see how it's got country elements, but it's not a full-on country
Yeah,
album. It's got, and I know that this might offend country fans, but like a lot of country music's lyrics are very, very basic and
very
just
basic. Yeah,
completely bland and excruciating to listen to, and
yeah,
that's what I don't like about country. It's not so much the music, it's just lyrically what's happening there, and
yeah.
this does have the twang of country, but
It's
it
there.
has a lot more thought,
I
than
mean, there's
some of the stuff.
banjo on this album. There's banjo on this album.
Yeah, there is.
So, and I'm completely fine with that. So, no,
Normally, I'm not fine with that either.
what's that?
Normally, I'm
Normally, I'm
not
not.
fine with
No,
that.
no, I'm not the biggest fan of banjo, but it works really well on this album. And his harmonica playing and stuff is fantastic. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Do I think of it as a country? I personally don't think of it as a country album. I think of it
No.
more of a blues. There's more of a blues vibe for me, I think. Um,
Yeah.
especially in the sort of the overarching quality of the music. It's a sad album. It's a
To
sad
me,
album.
it feels like a hybrid of
Yeah,
blues and folk and country.
yeah.
Just
It's
kind of
definitely there.
taking the best parts of each and putting
Right.
it into one.
Yeah. I feel like I'm wondering too. The album is pretty for a debut album. I find it to be pretty mature. Um,
Mm,
I would actually say that a lot of the stuff that Ryan Adams released after this album was a lot less mature. It was more poppy. It was a lot less, in my opinion, a lot less meaningful. Whereas this album is just it's raw. Like I said, it's very sort of unpolished, and it sounds like it should be coming from someone who's older than 26 or 27.
yeah,
Um, there's a lot of experience in those lyrics for someone that age.
I can definitely agree with that.
Mhm.
It almost sounds like it should be a mid-career masterpiece, but it
Right.
is. It's a
No.
debut.
Yeah. It sounds like something that's yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it. Something that somebody worked on. You had a lot of studio experience and had that sort of songwriting expertise under their belt, and then put out 3 albums, and then said, okay, now it's time to do the album that matters. Um,
Right.
it's it does not feel like a debut. Um, and again, his Ryan Adams music has sort of bumped. It's kind of bumped all over the place. It's gone from rock to pop to I know that he's a kind of a big metalhead, and I think he's put out some sort of metal albums or like homage to metal bands. I haven't listened to any of that stuff by him because I just don't
Oh
think he can do
man.
it. Because I know he's really big into metal. Um, he did an album about 10 years after this came out. In fact, I think it came out in 2011 called Ashes and Fire. And that, to me, that's the closest he's ever kind of come to Heartbreaker in the sense that a lot of the elements are there too. But I still feel like this is a seminal work by him. And if I had to pick a Ryan Adams album to talk about, this is why I'm doing this, I would be Heartbreaker. It really
I
sort of
can see why.
meets
I,
his sound.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can definitely see why. It's a brilliant piece of music, and I'm really happy that it clicked with me.
Yeah.
Because when I listened to it the first time, I could tell it was one of those things that, and I'm sure you've had this happen to you too, where you may not like it, but at the same time, you don't think it's bad. It's just not
Right.
your deal. Like you can tell it's well made, even though you're not, digging it.
Right.
So I'm happy it clicked. But I have some questions for you though, because this was your album suggestion, so I wanted to ask
Yeah.
these two things. Do you remember like the first time you listened to it, or how did you discover it?
Hmm. Yeah. I'm not sure I can remember the first time I listened to it. I think it probably was around the time, as best as I can recall. I do remember when Gold came out. I remember really digging songs like New York, New York, and some of the music off Gold. And I think that album caused me to um, search his other work. And at that time, it was
Yeah.
just Heartbreaker. I also, there's this weird, I'm wondering, I'm a huge fan of I don't think it had any relevance. Maybe it did. I don't know. Annie Leibovitz is one of my favorite photographers. She's
Mhm.
photographed hundreds, if not thousands, of musicians. And I remember I was looking through a Annie Leibovitz portrait book that I own, and she did a photo shoot with him. I think she did it at the Chelsea Hotel in New York, and it was like this really raw. He was like, it almost looks like the cover photo, and I don't think she shot the cover photo. I don't know. I have to check. I don't think she did, because I don't think he was famous enough at the time to have Annie Leibovitz shoot his cover photo.
Yep.
But the photo that she shot was like him on like a bed with like an orange. I can still see it, like an orange bedspread, and it was like in a kind of a dingy hotel. And he's got the acoustic guitar and like the denim shirt and like the ashtray with the cigarettes. And it was just like, this doesn't look like a kid, or like a young guy. This is a guy who's seen some things. And I remember thinking like, I gotta know where that comes from, which made me want to like search out his music.
Yeah, I could totally see that too. There have been times where I've checked out artists flat out because I liked their look.
Yeah, or the vibe they give off, even if it's just in a photo or an interview. Like, I kind of want to know how this translates into music.
I actually just Googled the picture you were talking about.
Yeah, did I get
And
it right? I probably haven't seen it in 15 years.
yeah, he is sitting on a bed, he's with his
Yep.
guitar.
Yep. There's
And you got most of everything right. The only thing
okay.
you got incorrect
Uh,
was the bedspread sheet, which is blue.
Blue. Okay, I picture it like orange or gold, but all right, cool. Blue. Yeah, but I mean,
He
it's
does
kind of
have
a
he does have like a gold sticker on his guitar though.
fair enough. Fair enough. No, I'll have to Google it too. But yeah, it's been a while since I've seen it, and it's a great. Isn't there like a little bit of motion in the shot? Like, isn't he playing the guitar?
Maybe.
Maybe, or like a
I'm
little bit
seeing
of
a
motion, a
couple
little.
different like
Yeah. It could have been a whole series of photos that she did too. I don't know for
yeah.
sure. But yeah.
Or maybe the one you saw, maybe she did multiple and the one you
Yeah,
saw was
maybe.
just in that book and not
Yeah.
online anywhere. That's
Yeah,
also
yeah.
possible.
Right. Right, right, right. So that's the best answer I can give you. I can't pinpoint a time when I was like, I bought the album the day it came out. I know I didn't do that with
Hmm.
this, but I've definitely liked it pretty close to since it came out. I would say 2001 or 2002.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you have a favorite song off of it?
You absolutely. For me, hands down, it's "Call Me on Your Way Back Home." Um, it's
Oh my God. That
it's
song that song destroyed me.
it's yeah, it's one of those songs where it's so delicate. Um, for me, it's definitely the highlight of the album. It's a delicate song. The guitar is just, it's haunting. It's so delicate and haunting. The lyrics are beautiful. I think that anyone who has ever been in a relationship and been in love with someone, and then having, if you're separated from that person for whatever reason, whether you leave to go to work, you leave to go on a trip, or whatever the situation is, that feeling of longing, that missing that someone is so just evident in those lyrics. You can
Mm,
hear it in his voice how much whoever he's singing about, he misses that
yeah.
person. And the line, the last few lyrics of the song, I just want to die without you. Um,
Yeah, I was
it
blown
ends
away
in a
by
very,
that.
yeah, and I mean, and the, I just want to die without you. The last line of the song, "Without you, honey, I ain't nothing new," which to me is like, I don't know. I read a lot of, personally, I just read a little bit of suicidal tendencies in the way that song ends. Um,
Yeah.
it sounds like a person who's sort of given up. Um, and then at the very end of that song, like the drums come in, they're so delicate. It's just haunting. Um, yeah, it's for me, it makes the album. It's a beautiful song. I think it's one of those songs that most artists would say, "Man, I wish I could write that song."
Yeah,
Um, and
absolutely.
I love simple songs. Like I love songs that are just beautiful. And I remember, without going too crazy into detail, but I remember I was on a flight once, 10 years ago, flying away from someone, and like having like my, probably what was it in those days? Was it like an iPod Touch or something? I don't even know what it was, but like I had music with me on the airplane,
Mhm.
and like I'm listening to whatever I was listening to at the time, and like skip the track, and like "Call Me on Your Way Back Home" comes on. Totally unexpected. Like I was not looking to listen to Heartbreaker on this flight, and
Yeah.
I'm just sitting on the airplane, in the window seat, uh, crying, just sobbing my eyes out because "Call Me on Your Way Back Home" is playing, and it's like, yeah, I'll never forget that. And again, when you have
Yeah.
those experiences with music, it's powerful.
And it's
Powerful.
like I can see it being one of those songs. I can tell it is for you, and it probably will be at some point for me, that when it just comes on, you just can't shut it off. You
No,
need
there's
to
no way.
listen to it.
Yeah,
There's no way.
yeah, there's no way. Yeah, you have to listen to it.
Yeah.
Heartbreaker. So if you're not familiar with Ryan Adams, if you're not familiar with Heartbreaker, um, I highly recommend it. It's the kind of music. Don't listen to it in the car. Don't listen to it with friends. I don't know. I feel like if you've never heard it, what would be your advice, Sam? Um, I would say, find a quiet spot, dark room, put it on, and definitely listen to it, from beginning to end. Don't skip any tracks. It's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it any better. It is a complete masterpiece, and it's one of those things that uh, I don't even know what to say. It's just it's such a beautiful record and something that it would be difficult to listen to other people, because when you're listening to it, you're going to have an emotional experience, and if
Yeah.
the other person isn't,
Yes.
that's
Well,
not a particularly fun situation. And there are
no.
some albums that I just kind of keep to myself, that I don't play around people, and it's just
Yes.
me. And
Yes.
I think this will end up being one of them one day. The more time I have to sit with it, because I will revisit this album at some point, because
Yeah.
it's brilliant.
It is cool. All right. So I think we should move on to album number two um, for our Generation Gap podcast today. Take it away.
So I had heard of Heartbreaker one other time, and I was thinking, what's an album that's somewhat similar but different that we can kind of compare and contrast to it?
Yeah.
And the first album that came to mind was an album that's in my top five favorite albums of all time. And within that list, they're all at number one, because you really can't pick one. So there's
Sure.
just a couple that are in that,
Yeah.
realm.
Yep.
And for me, that's Neutral Milk Hotel's "In the Airplane Over the Sea,"
Yeah.
which that album really means a hell of a lot to me.
Okay. Well, I like you went first for Heartbreaker. I will go first for this album, and
Yes.
I'll be, totally upfront and totally just blunt and honest. I'd heard of the album, so when you sent it
Mhm.
to me, it wasn't like it caught me off guard. Like, who is that? I definitely knew of the album, but I really couldn't in my brain. I couldn't hear any of the music, so I went and listened to it. I've listened to it just about twice this week, and I completely agree with you that there are some correlations, there are some similarities between this album and Heartbreaker. Um, so my first reaction, so again, coming from someone who's really never heard it, or if I did hear it, I just didn't remember it. Um,
Hmm.
Two things jumped out at me. The
Yeah.
first thing that jumped out at me was like the layering of the music. The music is so layered and so. I feel like it's a very complex album. Um, the kind of album where I would need to listen to it several more times to sort of understand the complexity of the music.
Full
That's
disclosure, you
yeah,
never will. I mean, I've listened to that
never,
album a
right.
million
That's right.
times, and I'm still picking things out. It's
Still
one of those
picking,
for
yeah,
me. Yeah.
yeah. So
Anyway,
okay,
sorry.
good.
Continue.
No, no, no. I'm glad. I was waiting for you to be like, "What are you talking about? It's super simple. Here's what it means." No, good.
No, 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 no.
The other thing that literally jumped out because I had it on in my computer was that it sounds like it sounds like a Wes Anderson soundtrack. Like the music is kind of, and again, I'm just being honest. There's a certain sort of goofiness and silliness to the music, especially in the way the songs are sung. That it
Yeah,
has this sort of Art Deco kind of like Life Aquatic or something Wes Anderson type of vibe to it. That it's weird, but it's weird in like a brilliant sort of like Wes Anderson way that you're like, what is wrong with these people? But you have to appreciate it. You have to
yeah.
appreciate it. Yeah.
It's one of those things that's weird and goofy, but at the same time, seriously deep and a very
Deep.
depressing record.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. But I mean the same could be said for Wes Anderson movies. I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan. Like I love all of his work. But
Yeah.
on the outside, his movies are weird and quirky. And like if you don't give them the time, you could make an argument that they're kind of dumb. They're kind of stupid. There's silliness in his movies, which for
Yeah.
me is the genius of Wes Anderson. And this music just seems to go along. It had that kind of vibe, that kind of like goofiness, but in a brilliant way.
I completely agree. It's goofy. The song titles are totally weird, but
Yeah.
then some of them I can't figure out, but some of them I have gotten an explanation on what they are, and when
Okay.
I did, it was like it was so sad. King of Carrot Flowers, I still have no idea what that means.
Okay. Right.
Uh, but the two-headed boy thing is a reference to the Coney Island freak shows,
Oh, okay. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I see that.
which is when I'll explain that more when I get into the concept of what this album is, because this is a loose concept album too.
Mm-hmm. 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 Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
that was actually one of my favorite tracks off the album too. I really liked that. I really liked that song.
part one or part two?
I liked part one better, honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like it was one of the tracks that I had to like turn up and be like, okay. In fact, I remember when that track came on because it's about just about halfway through, right? The part one, something
yeah,
like
it's
that.
almost near the middle.
Yeah.
It's right
So like,
before halfway.
yep. And the first few tracks, I was like, quirky, weird, and I'm not gonna lie, turned it down a little bit. But then like
Okay.
that song came on, and I was like, oh, there's something happening here that I need to understand. Turned it up again and was like, yeah. And that kind of, so that was the song that kind of hooked me in for the rest of the album. Kind of
Yeah,
risky on their part to put it in the middle because I feel like other people would have checked out by then. But that was my favorite track.
that's weird. You should say that because like the King of Carrot Flowers and the title track are usually the big fan favorites from this.
Okay. Okay.
But then again, this is one of those albums where there really are every song like the fan base completely loves because they have this weird cult following, and this
Yeah.
album has a weird cult following. So
Yeah.
let me get into what this album is about so we can discuss this further. Maybe some of these songs will click for you.
Okay.
So, Neutral Milk Hotel only ever put out two records.
Right.
This is their second album. So,
Yep.
the lead singer of this band, and this is really his project.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Jeff Mangum, and he was flying to Denver to record their first album on Avery Island. And while he was waiting in the airport, he wanted to get something to read for the flight, so he stopped in this bookstore and picked up a copy of the Diary of Anne Frank.
Mm.
And he read it, flipped out, spent days crying about it to the point where he was seeing her in his dreams, and that started to influence the music that he made.
Mhm.
So in a way, this album is a loose concept record about Anne Frank, but it's about more than just that. It's to me, this album's always been about the cruelty of the world and growing up and realizing that things are not as good as they're made out to be as when we're kids. And
Right.
it's coming to that realization, people cheat on each other, people commit cruel acts against each other. And
Right.
that's what this album is about to me. Um, but there's such a weird aura to this album because after this album, Jeff Mangum just vanished.
Right. Yeah. Because I did a little bit of research to see like what else was out there, and there's nothing else out now.
Nothing.
Nothing. Right.
So he just took off. REM wanted Neutral Milk Hotel to open up for them when they played
Oh,
in Athens, Georgia, and he said no.
wow.
And he completely vanished after the touring cycle for this album.
Yeah.
But what made this so mystical was that he would occasionally pop out in public and do like a guerrilla performance and then go back into hiding again for years.
Okay.
And then finally around 2011 he came out of his shell. He did a solo tour. He got Neutral Milk Hotel back together for a tour, and then as soon as things were getting started again, he vanished again.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
he lives in upstate New York though. Maybe we could run into
Yeah.
him.
I maybe we should reach out to him and see if he'll be on our podcast.
You
Um,
know, I have tried.
doesn't really well, it doesn't hurt to ask. We can ask again. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that the music would be inspired by such a um, uh, that book. I mean, that's sort of like it's a book that everybody reads, usually in grade school, middle school, something like that.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting that book sort of spawned the idea for that music. Um,
it
hmm,
is.
interesting, interesting. What was I going to ask you? I lost it. It'll come back to me. Now, this album is about 15, 16 years old, right? Give or take.
Yeah, it came out in '98.
Oh, so
So
never mind. It's older than that. Okay, I thought it was newer than that. So 98. Okay, so yeah, it sounded a little bit more modern than that, but interesting. What are some of the things that do you find the music very layered? I found there was a lot of layering in the music, a lot of sort of like
hmm.
level one, level two, level three, and like what's yeah.
So let me get into that. So I love this album so much that when I found out that there was a book written about the album, I went out and bought it because I was so fascinated with it when I first discovered it.
Did you just tell me? So you're telling me that this was an album that was conceived. So this is an album that's inspired by a book, and then went on to inspire a book to be written.
About it, yeah.
How
Yeah.
Wes Anderson is that? That doesn't get any more Wes Anderson. I love it.
This is yeah,
I
this
love
is
it. Yeah.
so what they were saying is that this album is very layered. There's a lot of um, not very typical instruments in this album. There's bass and drums, but there's
Yep.
also a horn section.
Yep.
There's also a singing saw too, which is an actual like saw.
Okay.
Somehow you plug into an amplifier and you rub like a violin bow against, and it makes this moaning sound.
Yeah. I think Arcade Fire uses one of those too. I think they
Which
do.
I'm not. That wouldn't
Yeah.
surprise me because
Yeah.
they've
Yeah.
said that
Yeah.
this is one of their biggest influences.
Yeah. Yeah. I know someone else does. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay.
Um, so when I was reading the book and they were talking about the recording process, the way that this would work is that everything is doubled. So
Okay.
Jeff Mangum would lay down the acoustic guitar track, and then to make it fuller, he'd lay down a second acoustic guitar track that was exactly the same.
Right.
He'd lay down two vocal tracks on top of each other, and it wasn't just like a cut and paste. You actually sung the song twice on top of each other.
Right.
The only exception to this
Hmm.
is the track "Oh Comely," the 8-minute song,
Right.
which he did in one take.
Wow. That's
It
impressive.
it was impressive, and they weren't even gonna record. He went in to test the mic, he started the song, did it in one take, like, it was so good. If you listen carefully, you can hear one of his bandmates in the control room yell, "Holy shit," when the song's done.
Wow. That's incredible. I don't think I
Yeah,
heard that. I wasn't listening with headphones, but that's awesome. Yeah. Wow.
um, yeah, so you are absolutely right. It is a
They're
very
together.
layered album.
Layered album. Yeah. And so you would probably. I mean, I found it to be that idea of the layering is about as I think that's where Heartbreaker and this album differ
Yeah.
tremendously, because Heartbreaker isn't layered. It's like, I mean, I don't know how many input tracks they were using for Heartbreaker, but it's like it's vocals, it's guitar, it's harmonica, it's drums, and it's like it was simple. It was like a lowest, like, keep it simple. Whereas this album kind of had that sort of like multi-dimensional feel to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely was interesting. I have to admit, like, it wasn't what I expected it to be. But I remember thinking that there was some, yeah, very interesting music. Again, the best parallel I can draw is like the entire time all I was doing was picturing the Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, because it just like even though that music, even though that movie has an incredible soundtrack, like I feel like they could have peppered a few of these songs in there and it would have fit. It would have fit beautifully.
Yeah. I haven't seen that, but I'll have to
Yeah.
watch that and get back to you.
It probably is my favorite Wes Anderson movie because it's just so ridiculous, but I
I'll
love it.
take your word for it. This is a very Wes Anderson album, but I never
Yeah,
put two to two together that a book inspired this album that inspired another book. I think that's
there's got to be a, like, is there a phenomenon? Does that have a name? I don't know. It's got to have a name.
I don't
I don't know.
know. I
But
love it. I
it's cool.
never put those two together. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Um,
Nice.
yeah. So
Cool. Yeah. I mean, two very interesting albums. And I plan on, much like you said about Heartbreaker, I plan on revisiting this again a couple times too. I think it's pretty cool. I'm glad I listened to it.
this is definitely an album that you need to listen to a few times because I didn't like it
Yeah.
much at first either, and
Right.
it was only an album that I could listen to late at night when I was so tired I was nearly delirious, and that's when it made
Yeah.
sense to me.
Right. Yeah.
And then at some point it just kind of clicked, and I was like, oh, I can listen to this at 9 a.m. now.
Right. 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 Nice. So we want to do a couple other things with the podcast. The couple other things that we talked about doing um, is that after we discuss our albums, we want to either talk about music that was popular at this time, a certain amount of time ago. So it's October, early October 2021, and we
October
just
5th.
October 5th, right? So I'm not sure when you'll hear this, but that's when it is today. And I thought it would be really cool for some of our episodes to look back and say, what were people listening to the first week in October in pick a year, 1990, just to kind of compare and contrast. We plan on doing that, but we won't be doing that today because something more relevant came to our attention today. We're
Yep.
gonna talk about this for a few minutes before we end our podcast. Today, Pitchfork. I'm a big Pitchfork reader.
Me too.
I enjoy their articles. I enjoy their commentary. Um, and they published an article today entitled um, Pitchfork Reviews Rescored. And they outlined 19 album review scores that we'd change if we could. And um, I saw this about 3 hours ago before we recorded this. And I have so many feelings about this. So many feelings about this. Now, and here's Sam. The
Yeah.
title alone, it says here are 19 album review scores that we change if we could, but they did change them. Like they're basically putting an article out saying, here's music that was released. We scored it, we reviewed it when it was released, when it was new, when it was fresh. They're basically saying we can't go back and change our review, but we're gonna anyway. Is that kind of what they're saying in this
Yeah,
article? Yeah.
basically. I mean, they saying that they can't change the review, but they kind of did by publishing this article.
Right. Because, this
So I
was a
think it's
published
just like an
article.
angle that they're coming at it to get people to check out the story.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. I mean, it definitely worked for me. It worked for me because the minute I saw it, I'm like, oh. Now the reason that I like immediately clicked on it was because one of the albums that they, um, in fact, wherever I saw it, like the thumbnail of the album was Lana Del Rey's "Born to Die," which was released in 2012, so just about 10 years ago. I am probably going to pick that album maybe for another podcast. I don't want to talk about it too much today, but like
Mm.
that's what made me click on the article to read this whole thing. And for "Born to Die," which was nearly panned when it came out. Um, they originally scored it a 5.5, and they bumped it up today to a 7.8. Um, yeah, and I still think it deserves a much better score than that. Granted, it's lyrically not her strongest work, but again, going back to like debut albums, it's a really strong debut album. Um, so that's what kind of hooked me into reading this. Was there
Yeah.
something that hooked you into reading this?
Um, yeah, there were a couple of things. I saw the what was it? The thumbnail that I saw was on
Hmm.
Pitchfork's website, and there were two things that intrigued me, and it was the Daft Punk robots
Yeah, right.
because they tech usually get pretty good reviews from Pitchfork, so I was curious as to what they were changing. And then I saw Jeff Tweedy from Wilco, and I know that Wilco's later stuff has not always gone over so well with Pitchfork, so I was wondering if maybe they changed their mind on a couple of Wilco albums. And I'm not even the biggest Wilco fan. I just,
Right.
I'm curious and know that there is like Wilco albums that they did not review well, and then
Mhm.
people are upset about it, and it's historically been viewed better than Pitchfork rated it. So I was curious if they were changing any of those, and they did one of them.
Mhm. Okay.
But I do have some very strong feelings on some of the things in on this list. Some of it is very positive. Some of it's
Yes.
not so positive.
Yeah.
Um, do you mind if I share a few
Go ahead.
albums?
Yeah, because then
Or
I have one more too. So go ahead. Yeah.
I'm so ready for this.
Yeah.
Um, so Rilo Kiley's takeoffs and landings bumped up from a
Mhm.
4 to an 8. I was happy to see that because I like Rilo Kiley a lot, and
Mhm.
I've always felt that they took too much uh, s- just like crap, in the
Okay.
press. They didn't deserve it. So it was
Sure.
nice to finally see one of their albums get a better rating because Rilo Kiley's a cool band, and I actually saw the lead singer from that band, Jenny Lewis, open for Death Cab
Oh
a
wow.
couple
Okay.
weekends ago. Yeah, she
Yeah.
was really good.
Nice.
Um, a lot of these I had no opinions about. The Sky Blue Sky by Wilco. I'm not really super familiar with that album, but I
Yeah.
know that a lot of Wilco fans love it because I
Okay.
know a few. So that was nice to see them bump up, and I know they'll be happy. So,
Right.
uh,
Yeah. And I am not familiar at all with the Liz, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it.
Liz Fair.
Liz Fair, is that okay? So basically, the way I read it, they like hated her
They
album.
gave her a
And
0.
they gave her a zero. Like, how do you give an album a zero? So that actually makes me want to go listen to this album now. In fact, I think,
Exactly.
yeah,
Because I feel
because
like a 0 should be as good as a 10.
yes, absolutely. Right? So, and I don't know how old this, oh, 2003. So it's not new. And I'm going to have to go back and be like, what was the deal with this album that they panned it so badly, not even giving it a one? And like to bump it up to a six today, that's huge.
That's
That's
huge. That's the
huge.
biggest jump
So
on this list.
it's the biggest jump on this list. So like when I was
Actually,
reading it, yeah.
no, you can keep going.
Yeah, so when I was reading it, like it just jumped out at me. I'm like, I know I've heard of Liz Fair, can't name one of her songs, but like I didn't realize that that album was her. I guess it's her debut album too, because it's self-titled. And I was like, is
It's
it?
actually not, believe it or not. I'm not super
Oh,
familiar with her
God.
stuff, but I
I don't
know
know. Yeah,
I know, I somebody was talking to me about her, so I looked up her discography just to get a
yeah,
better idea of, he was mentioning albums, and I wanted to know when in her career they were.
yeah.
And she actually had like a mid-career self-titled album,
Okay,
which
okay,
is weird because her
yeah.
first album is called Exile in Guyville,
Oh, okay.
and that was
Now,
actually her fourth record that they gave a 0. Now, an
wow.
interesting piece of trivia for you. Do you know
Sure.
which band
No.
has simultaneously both received a 10 from Pitchfork and a 0 from Pitchfork?
Um, I do not know. No.
Sonic Youth.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Wow, that's really fascinating. That is a jump.
I think that's an accomplishment in its own.
I would say so. Yeah, it's like yeah, wow, a 0 and a 10
So
from the same publication. Yeah,
there's two other things before I let you,
yeah,
because I know I'm saving up for this because this is like the grand finale to the segment. There's two things. They had two Daft Punk albums on there, and one made me incredibly happy to see, and one just completely pissed me off.
yep.
Discovery bumping from a 6.4 to a 10 was so exciting for me. I love Discovery. It's
Yes.
Daft Punk's best work. It's a
Oh,
great record.
it's a great record. I love that album. Yes, for sure.
And then they bumped Random Access Memories from an 8.8 to a 6.8. And I was like, that's a great record. It's not as good as Discovery, mind you, but
Yeah.
it's definitely still a solid 8.8 or 9.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounded to me when I read it they were sort of comparing it to Discovery, like which is almost a separate conversation to get into someday. But I'm not really sure that we should be comparing if artists put out an album and then 5 or 6 or 10 years go by and they put out another album, that album needs to be evaluated and critiqued and whatever picked apart as a standalone statement,
Yeah.
right, by that artist. To say, and I know we all do it, I'm just as guilty, but you say, oh, it's not as good as their last album, or it's not as good as 2 albums ago. But I don't know. I feel that's unfair to the artist to just compare it to something else they've done.
I
Um,
agree. And
yeah,
but we're all guilty of it. But when
we all
there's
do it. Sure.
if it's one of those albums that, if it's a band that's on like a 3-year album cycle,
Yeah,
then that makes more sense because
it
the
does.
headspace isn't that different. But to go that long between albums, it makes no
Right.
sense because they're completely different people when they release those two records.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. No, for sure. And I want to go back. I haven't listened to Discovery in so long. I used to listen to it all the time. It's such a great album. I got to go back and listen to it this week.
I have it on CD. It's such a
Yeah,
great record.
it's a great record.
I picked it up for $3
Yeah.
from Red Squirrel Records in Wallingford.
Yeah.
It was nice. And just real quick back in this list, the one other album I wanted to mention, I was happy to see the Strokes' Room on Fire go from an 8 to a 9.2. I've always
Okay.
thought that album was kind of underrated, so
Yeah. Yeah. It is pretty
that
underrated.
was
That's a
nice.
cool thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know I've been building up to this.
Well, once
Have at
again, I will only sort of um, skim the surface because this album, about halfway down their list, Interpol's "Turn on the Bright Lights," which is one of my all-time favorite albums. And I guarantee you again that I will pick this album for one of our podcasts. I can't tell you when. So it it just I can't understand how they gave it a 9.5. I feel like it's a brilliant album. um, and they bumped it down today to a 7. Um, and the way that they sort of wrote about it was that they sort of almost kind of dismissed it as kind of gimmicky, sort of like I don't know, like because of the genre, because of the fact that Interpol are sort of like this. I don't know what do they really consider those bands like the Killers and Interpol. They call them a lot of different things. Like here in the
Garage
article,
rock?
what's that?
Garage rock?
Yeah, they call them garage rock, but there's something I've heard of something else. I've heard them called something else too. I guess it's not important right now. It's just like they almost made it sound like because of the genre that they're in, they didn't, they shouldn't, and didn't have the right to write really good lyrics. And then like they were fine with it back when the album came out that the lyrics maybe aren't poetry, um, but now they're like chastising them for like not being good lyricists.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, what? Not to mention, and again, if I pick this album for one of our podcasts, I completely disagree with that. I feel like the lyrics on this album are absolutely genius. Brilliant. This is a brilliant record. It I don't know if it's where it falls in my like favorite, but it's one of my favorite albums.
Mm.
I just I don't really get mad, but today when I saw them bump it down like to a 7, I was like, there's no way. There's just no way. It's a brilliant album. Oh, I was pretty steamed, Sam.
I feel like they did it just to piss people off.
I feel like
'Cause-
they did it just to get someone to be like, "What are you doing?" Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because that's like universally known as an indie rock classic. It
sure,
really is.
yeah. I remember a Brandon Flowers either interview or lead singer of the Killers a while ago. I think it was an interview, and I remember when he said when they were making Hot Fuss, which is their debut album, the Killers' debut album. Like they had a lot of music on in the studio when they were recording that album, and I remember him saying that "Turn on the Bright Lights" was like on all the time as like
Mm.
this sort of like um, what do you call it, like a guide almost of like this new genre of music that was like springing up in the early 2000s. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I don't know the word for it, but I know what you're talking about.
yeah,
It's almost like
yeah,
it's like a template for like what, you
kind of,
know,
kind of,
we want to sound like. This
yeah,
is the album that we're trying to make our version of.
right, right. So to just end this segment again, I don't think this everyone has the right to their own opinion. Obviously, when it comes to music, music is highly opinionated and highly personal. However, you can't really put an article out that says here are 19 album. Well, you can because they did, but like here are 19 album review scores that we change if we could. You did change them, and I just feel like it's almost what's the old cliche that people say all the time? Hindsight is 2020.
Yep.
So just because you're going back and listening to an album that maybe you haven't listened to in 10 or 15 years doesn't mean that that album is any worse. It just means
Right.
that you're listening to it differently, right?
That's a fair
Or it
point.
does,
Yeah,
or it
I don't
doesn't
think you're
mean,
wrong.
yeah, and it doesn't mean that it's any better either. It's still the same album that you heard back in 2000 and whatever or 19 whatever. And to say that it's worse now because you're older or that it's better now that you're older, to me that's kind of just
No, you're just it's just
doesn't
I think
doesn't
it's really more on how it connects with you now. So,
right,
well,
right.
when the reviewer first listened to this album and he was nearly 14, it was
Yeah,
a 9.5 to him. It was like
absolutely.
one of the best things he's ever heard. And now that he's older and has had more experience, it's compared to other things, maybe not to him
Yeah,
now what it was when he
right.
was 14. And that's honestly, there's not a lot of albums that I listened to obsessively when I was 14 that I listen to a lot now. I mean, it's not because I think that they're bad, but just
No,
because
you change.
you change.
You change, but the music doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. But
The
then
music
again,
doesn't.
I still have fond memories when I listen to albums
Yeah,
that I was into when I was 14, like, Eddie
yeah,
Vedder's Into the Wild soundtrack. I'll put
yeah.
that on and be like, this is still a great record.
Right, right. Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. Well, that's that. We could be here all night talking about this interesting list. If you haven't seen it, it's on Pitchfork's website, or if you check it out on Instagram, it's like right on the top of their website right now. Pitchfork reviews rescored. Um, highly contentious. Highly contentious. We're going to end every podcast with something that Sam came up with. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, so this is a segment that you know how people joke about having like shower thoughts? This actually, this was like the perfect, this is
It
exactly that. I didn't
came to
believe
you.
in them until this happened.
Okay, do tell.
Yeah. It was like very late at night. I just finished up a bunch of homework and I was like, oh, I should probably go take a shower. And I
Yeah,
did. And this idea just came to me like out of like sleep delirious, just
yeah,
completely gone. And I was like, you know what? We should have a segment where we talk about um, what we're listening to on repeat because
yeah,
everybody, that's always changing.
yeah, for sure, definitely.
So that's what this segment's called. It's called On Repeat, and
Okay,
it's about what are we listening albums or songs that we've just had on repeat around the time of recording this.
all right.
So, does anything stand
Yes,
out for you?
I have been listening to an album called Ash and Ice by The Kills. I
Mm.
listen to it pretty much every day. Maybe not every day, but I probably will listen to that music at least 5 times a week, maybe more.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I am obsessed with this album. And there's specifically one track on that album called Echo Home, which is quickly become one of my favorite songs. So yeah, I listen to it all the time. All the time. It's definitely on repeat. Yep, definitely.
Yeah, that's it. I've heard parts of that record. I'll have to listen to it in
Yeah.
full, and I'm sure you'll at some point pick it for this podcast, and
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
can
I
get
could
into
see
it.
myself picking that. Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting album too. It's very it kind of bounces all over the place. Yeah, I'd have to think about how to talk about it. I wasn't prepared to talk about it, but I listen to it all the time. The other song that is on repeat for me, I've become kind of sort of almost like obsessed with this song, is actually on uh, "Turn on the Bright Lights" by Interpol. It's called "Leif Erikson,"
Mm.
and to me, it's the most brilliant song on the record. I can't tell you why. I can't tell you why I'm so obsessed with it, but I find myself walking around just singing the lyrics
Yeah.
constantly, constantly. Yeah.
No, it's a good song. I've definitely
Yep.
heard that before, and
Yep.
it's a really well written song. I would agree.
Yep.
Um,
What's on repeat for you?
some repeat for me. Let's see. There's a song called "Schizophrenia" by Sonic Youth that I can't
Okay.
stop listening to because I think I just love it so much. The way that Thurston Moore and Lee Ronaldo's guitars just kind of intertwine with each other on that
Yeah.
album, and then how Kim Gordon's bass and Steve Shelley's drumming just kind of elevates everything.
Yeah.
It's just like the perfect song in
Hmm.
my opinion.
Hmm.
Um, the new Radiohead single, as I'm a massive Radiohead fan, has been on repeat. If you say the
Yeah.
word from the
Yeah.
upcoming Kid Amnesia box set,
Right. Yep.
which uh, I'm really looking forward to. In terms of albums, um, there hasn't been a lot of albums that I've been listening to lately, just simply because of the time I have, school and stuff. I'm not really just sitting down and focusing anigh. But I
Right.
was in Barnes and Noble the other day and walked through the bargain bins and was
Yeah.
excited to find Spoon's greatest hits on vinyl. So I picked
Oh. Okay. Yeah.
which that CD, because I have it on CD too, has lived in my car since July 4th of 2020. It's still there.
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
just like if there's somebody in the car, I need to figure out what to play. It's perfect because it's great, but it's also not super offensive or experimental or crazy.
Y-
Just well
Yeah.
crafted music.
Yeah. Cool. I'll have to listen to that now. Yeah. Interesting. Cool.
Yeah,
All right. Well, that was our first. I guess we'll call that our debut episode of Generation Gap. I hope you
we
guys
did
have.
it.
You did it. Yeah, I'm excited. This is great. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. It was fun to make this, and I think Sam and I are going to try to make one once a week. That's the goal. It might not be every week, but that's the goal, right, Sam?
That's the goal, and
Cool.
yeah, that's that's the goal. We're gonna try and make them at least every week, and try
Yeah.
and put one out at least every week.
Yep.
So
And then, of
yes,
course, once we get this going, I think it would be fantastic to get some feedback from anyone that might listen to it. I think that music is the kind of thing that really inspires dialogue, um, and I love the fact that when you can be so obsessed with an album like Heartbreaker that someone might make a comment or have a thought about it that you would have never thought about. So I really look forward to having some discussions too from anyone that might listen.
absolutely.
Cool.
Thank you for listening, and we'll
We'll
see
talk
you
to you
next
next
week.
time. All right. See ya.
Bye.